Welcome. I'm Shoma Jurgensen, the chair of the School of Business at Rasmussen College in Brooklyn Park, and I'd like to thank you for interacting with me in the next in the professional communication series, Facts Are Facts, right? Why this topic? Of course, facts can be determined in a lot of measurable ways, but particularly as the information age expands, the internet expands, there are a lot of experts who put the word fact on what is actually opinion or assumption and even bias and try to convince others that they are facts. So I want to talk a little bit about what the difference is between these types of thoughts and evidence. So the learning objectives for today's presentation is one, to distinguish between what is fact, what are opinions, what are assumptions, and what are biases. So first, fact versus opinion, because these really are the most often used labels in terms of our ideas and the way that we construct our thoughts. So facts are measurable, observable, and verifiable, right? So let me use an employment situation. If I have an employee who is regularly late to work, a fact might be Henry is 10 minutes late to work 4 out of 5 business days. I can measure it, it's 10 minutes. I can observe it 4 out of 5 business days, and I can verify it, let's say, with a time card or with testimony from other employees. Okay. Now, let's talk about opinion then. Opinion are judgments. They must be supported with evidence to be considered valid. So my opinion about Henry's behavior, and behavior is observable. Okay, I don't know what's going on in Henry's head. That's a judgment. Okay, so the same situation where I have an employee, Henry, who is 10 minutes late 4 out of 5 days a week. A judgment or an opinion would be Henry doesn't care about his work. He's always late. Okay. Now, if I'm going to say it must be supported with evidence, I'm going to need more than the fact that Henry is 10 minutes late 4 days a week. Now, that is a compelling fact to support my opinion that he doesn't care about work. I can verify it. But is it enough? Is it enough to be considered valid? No. I might want to talk to Henry and find out what's going on. There might be other behaviors that I can document. But until I do, this is purely a judgment on my part, an opinion. Okay. So let's talk about assumptions. Assumptions refer to things that we believe to be true. Okay. They're based on patterns that guide our behavior. So let's assume an assumption that I'm a manager that believes that being on time is the most important way to show respect for your job. Okay. So if I believe this to be true, when Henry is 10 minutes late 4 out of 5 days, based on this pattern, I will make the assumption that Henry does not care about his job, right? Now that is going to guide my behavior, okay? If I assume that Henry does care about his job, my behavior toward him might be different. In this case, let's assume I believe Henry doesn't care about his job. So I'm going to reprimand Henry for his lateness. When it continues, I'm going to put together a corrective action plan and start to document Henry's behaviors. Based on this assumption, I might notice other behaviors that might lead me to believe that Henry doesn't care about his job, whether or not that's true. Now, let me make the assumption that Henry does care about his job. Okay, so I'm going to assume that Henry cares about his job. I'm going to notice a pattern that he is late. My behavior now will be radically different. I'm going to talk to Henry. I'm going to find out what has been happening. And I might find out that Henry doesn't care about his job. But I might find out that Henry's wife's work schedule changed. And now Henry has to take his kids to school, and he did not have to do that previously. If I find this out, and Henry is very upset about this because he understands how important it is for me to have my employees be on time. So instead of a corrective action plan, we might put a plan in place that says, Henry, let's talk to Sue. And on the days that you have to take your kids to school, Monday through Thursday, Sue will take care of the first 10 minutes of covering your phone. In exchange, on Friday, you're going to cover the first 40 minutes of Sue's shift to have it be fair. Now, my assumption drove very different behavior based on the same set of facts. Now, there's biases. Now, if you know anything about sewing, and I have to admit I know very little about sewing, when someone talks about a bias cut, they're talking about cutting something on a diagonal. There's a slant. We talk about slants in data. We talk about biases in data. And what they are is a set of prejudices or values or prevailing attitudes that influence our perception. Okay? They're often irrational. So, for example, we're going to call it a bias now against Henry. My bias against Henry's lateness might be a result of my being regularly picked up late from school my entire childhood. And I felt that my mom or my dad didn't value me because they were always late picking me up from school. Okay? Now, this is not stem in racism or hatred. It's simply a set of values or prevailing attitude that has built up over my life. All right? It gives a slant to the way I perceive or view things. Okay? Sometimes it's based on humor. I blame TV sitcoms for this. That something that we see as funny over and over again actually does inform our biases as we interact with our employees and our friends and our family. It could be based on misinformation. I might hear information about Henry from a third party that then leads me to a bias about Henry, or fear. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job if I can't control my employees. So my bias is then that Henry is threatening my job and performance. Okay? There are biases that are stemming in racism and hatred, don't get me wrong. But not all biases stem from racism or hatred. And the first way to prevent biases in perception and thinking is to examine them. So let's talk about where biases in... Let's talk about... Oh, goodness. Let's talk about where biases and assumptions come from. Okay? If we look at the circle of knowledge, what I call circle of knowledge, there's a very thin slice based on what we know, or what I know in my life. And the older I get, the more I realize how slim the slice of the pie really is. And then there's a slice of the pie that indicates what I don't know. So this is that whole area that I know I don't understand. So this might be the inner workings of computers or how turbines are built. I know I don't know those things. Okay. Then there's this big slice. You notice most of this pie is filled with things that I don't know. Right? But then there are things that I think I know. I think I know how Henry feels. I think I know what my students are thinking. But I don't actually know it without asking, without gathering more evidence. So in fact, I'm working on assumption here. Right? There is a slice of this pie that I know information, but I don't know I know. And although that sounds odd, this is the deepest reaches of culture. Right? I don't know if you can see here, but I am of Indian descent. I was born in Kolkata, India. There are certain things that I know. For example, I know that it's respectful to take your shoes off before you come in the house. If someone doesn't do that at my home, I might feel out of sorts, but not really know why. Okay, that because my culture has informed my assumption or pattern about that behavior. All right, so if someone comes in without taking off their shoes, I might assume that they are rude, but in fact, they simply don't know the custom. Okay? Now, there's this other big slice of pie, an area where we don't know that I don't know. Okay, and this is where biases come from. This is that completely unexamined slant or perception. And that can be based on age or race or gender. So I don't even know how a man versus a woman might act in a certain situation. I don't know how colors at a wedding might affect one ethnicity over another. And I certainly don't know, for example, how a healthy, active 68-year-old will act versus the mountains of information that I've gotten from the media. So this is where biases live. All together is what we consider our knowledge. And you notice that very little of it can be based in fact, but our emotions are based in all of it, even the facts. Examining them, so giving some forethought, also forewarns us of our behaviors in the future. Thank you for joining me in this discussion. I look forward to hearing from you about what you think. Thank you.